Hello and welcome to your weekly briefing for Global Conflict. This format is going to change slightly. Now, in the past week, what I did was I sort of polled people on what they thought I should cover in my weekly report, and pretty much unanimous that I should cut out the documentation of the territories that had flipped, which probably amounted to about 25% of the time of my report. And instead, I'll be switching out that time for coverage of Global Conflict 2. And that means that I'm also not going to be able to cover the specific days for it. So I'm going to revert to just calling this the Global Conflict Report. It will cover both Global Conflict 1 and 2, and I'll simply be numbering them. So this will be report number 1, next week will be report number 2, and so on. So starting off with Global Conflict 1, not a whole lot has changed this week. Most alliances have maintained their diplomacy as they were. We still have House 15 fighting House 1. They are at peace with pretty much every other house as far as I'm aware. House 2 continues to fight House 19, or at least all evidence points to it. I haven't actually managed to make contact with anybody in House 2 this week, although I haven't tried as hard as I could have, obviously. In addition to this, House 9 is also still at war with House 19. So what we have here is pretty much just a repeat of what we had last week, and overall is not that interesting, to be honest. I haven't heard anybody really mention anything of note, except for the fact that houses are feeling a bit of the strain of resources flowing away from this world towards Global Conflict 2. So despite Global Conflict 2's lukewarm start, there do appear to be players who are interested in moving to that server and making it their main world, which is not all that surprising if a lot of players think that, the glory race is pretty much won for this age in Global Conflict 1. So, moving over to Global Conflict 2, this is where all the exciting stuff is happening, really. Now, there is some information on alliances. House 10 and House 11 are reported to both be in the same alliance, and as you can see from the map, they make up a good share of the western side of the map. House 10 controls a good part of the United States and Canada. House 11, I think they've actually dropped some land in the past day. I think they had a little bit more before, but I can't say for certain. But that is going to be sort of a super house alliance here unless something happens, and they are currently fighting House 14, although how long that maintains is yet to be seen, because generally when starting wars at this early in the game, only the players who are really spending a lot of money can actually afford to participate, obviously. We do have a significant presence, once again, in the Russian territories. House 12 has taken over Siberia quite nicely, which rather surprises me because that is a huge country, and usually takes a bit to hold, doesn't it? As you can see, there are a lot of neutral parishes here yet, and a lot of House 1 parishes. So I think if they are not currently at war, House 1 and House 12 will end up at war sometime in the future. From what my sources tell me, that House 12 actually moved in there to sort of troll the former Russian House players who wanted that territory, and now those players moved into House 1, and interestingly enough, I haven't heard reports of them fighting each other, but I suspect that will be happening. House 1 is sort of the House 19 version of Global Conflict 1, and a lot of their players are Russian. You're going to just see a lot of houses that are based around nationalities, and I know a lot of players, I never really referred to House 19 as a Russian house, but there are a lot of Russian players in it, obviously, in Global Conflict 1. And that seems to be more of the case here. Once again, in Global Conflict 2, we have the Turkish house as well, where a lot of the factions if we take a look at it, a lot of the factions, they look Turkish. So I'm not exactly sure how you would describe it, but we'll see how that breaks down. And at the moment, the other diplomacy that I have for this world is that House 2 is Polish and neutral, and House 9 might be at war with House 13 after a reported scouting and possible pillaging. I don't think there was actually a capturing involved, and those two houses are significantly displaced from one another to the point where I don't see any real reason why that war couldn't be settled quite early on. I'm not sure of the alliances of the other houses, and in the following weeks I'll be working on getting that information. But we are 11 days in, and so far the big alliances seem to be the House 10, House 11 alliance, House 12 in Russia, and House 1 in China. But it's still very early, and things can swing quite drastically. One final thing is, for those of you who didn't notice, Firefly actually started an ideas thread for the 6th Age. I thought that I should present this to you in a video along with Global Conflict 1, so that way you could still vote. I don't think Firefly has settled on the actual rules yet. The thread is still open, so you can still make suggestions if you have any ideas for what should happen in the 6th Age of certain worlds. Now, currently, the polling shows a pretty significant favorability towards not closing them. You like the idea of being able to achieve final victory on a game world. It is somewhat dubious wording, but if we look at the very first, the original post posted by a Firefly administrator, we can see that the final victory condition would ultimately end a world on the player's terms, allegedly. Now, I have been in favor of allowing worlds to obtain, I want to combine those words. I have been in favor of allowing worlds to achieve a final victory for quite some time, and I actively support it. As you can see right here, my X is next to the yes. And I encourage other players to do so as well, because having all of these open worlds laying around is like having a whole bunch of junk cars sitting on your lawn. Really, they might not cost you anything. They might actually be making you some money, because from every now and then you can take a couple parts off. You can take the muffler off and maybe sell it to somebody, or even repair your current car with it. But it doesn't look nice for your house. So when people come around and they see that you have a whole bunch of junk cars laying around, it gives them a negative impression of your place. I sort of think that is what happens with Stronghold Kingdoms. A lot of new players will come along, they'll try the first world, for example, UK1, and they'll notice that they're among a bunch of Crown Prince players or Crown Princess players, and then they will quit because they can't overcome that level. That discrepancy in rank. And you can add all the additional features you want to it. You can tweak the rules however you want. It's not going to bring new players to those old worlds. I'm sorry. They're going to continue to slowly die off, and I would like to see them close, obviously, preferably through, the player's decision to close it, but it would be good to focus the player base, the strength of the player base, on newer worlds. Feel free to let Firefly know what you think, though. You probably disagree with me. You're probably angrily mashing on the dislike button. Dislike! You can't have a different opinion. That's unpopular. Yeah, well, that is my opinion of it. I explained why I hold that opinion. I'm somebody who has invested a lot of time into Stronghold Kingdoms, obviously. I started playing back in October 2011, I believe it was, and I have maintained a presence on my very first world since then, and I have no problem giving that up, because I used to be part of the bandwagon that didn't want to close worlds, but I've actually changed my mind after joining USA 3 and seeing how fun the beginning of the game actually is, even for somebody who wasn't carding. I did my no cards build log at the start of that world, and then I also started Island Warfare 1 when that one came out, and once again it was more interesting than logging in for 10 minutes every day to UK World 5 and repairing 40 villages from AI attacks. That's just not interesting anymore to me. Maybe it is to some players, and then there are players who will suggest implement more quests. Why? So that the 0.05 maybe percent of players who are actually at that point, that they've completed all the quests, don't leave the game. I don't think it is significant. That number of players is significant enough to justify the additional development time of new quests, because they're not going to be seen by very many people. There isn't a whole lot of point in creating content for the game that's going to only be seen by a very small fraction of the players who play the game. That time could be better utilized developing content for the parts of the game that pretty much everybody will be able to appreciate. That's my opinion on the situation. So anyway, thank you very much for watching this week. I understand the format is a little bit different, maybe not up to your tastes. There wasn't a whole lot of news that I was able to sort of get my hands on. As you can see, Global Conflict 2 is still a bit in flux, and it's really hard to pin down any alliances at the moment. But Global Conflict 1, not a whole lot going on in there this week, and that's why you have the current lack of information, really.
Stronghold Kingdoms. What will you fight for? Play now for free.